Do you want to feel more confident about evaluating your equity as part of your overall compensation package? It's confusing. So as you know, your career has a major impact on your long-term financial outcome. In these days, more and more people are looking to work for private tech companies, pre-IPO, and getting equity as part of their compensation package. So now, not only do you have to negotiate dollars and cents, but you also have to really understand how the value of that equity you're getting is part of your overall compensation. And on top of that, owning equity in a company sounds great, but it can be challenging to project just how much you might actually benefit or even receive in your future if your company goes public, which we all hope, right? The way most offers are presented do not typically provide enough information to even fully evaluate where your equity is actually worth today or even in the future. But I'm Tony from Wealthfront, and today I want to spend a few minutes walking you through this ever complicated process. Typically, equity comes in the form of stock options or restricted stock units, which are usually referred to as RSUs. Stock options are given for a company that are usually a few years away from going public and require you to exercise your option to buy a share for a fixed price. The earlier you join a company, the lower the cost to exercise typically is. That's usually how it works. Restricted stock units do not require any type of purchase, but instead are given as part of your compensation as they vest. When you receive a compensation offer, you'll typically see the number of shares you're being granted. But in order to properly evaluate how much these shares are worth, you need to understand these key points: what your percentage of ownership of the company is, and what the company valuation is. These two things together are typically the value of your equity. So now, let's go over how to best understand your actual percentage of ownership in the company, which is really based on how many shares you're granted. When you see the number of shares, there's really not much to react to because the number is less relevant than the actual percentage of the company you own. To calculate the percentage of ownership, take the number of shares you were offered and divide them by the total number of fully diluted shares outstanding. This tells you what percentage of the company you own. Now, to determine the total number of fully diluted shares outstanding, you'll have to ask someone on the recruiting or finance team at your company. This number should include common stock, RSUs, preferred stock, options outstanding, unissued shares remaining in options, and RSU pool and warrants. Don't worry, this is important to understand, so never be afraid to ask this. If the company is not willing to disclose the number of fully diluted shares outstanding, that could be a bad sign, and honestly, a pretty big red flag. They are likely trying to hide something in this case, and you should probably reconsider working there. Okay, so now that we've gone over percentage ownership, let's now talk about the second component in our equation, company valuation. The best way to think about this is that the size of the pie matters more than your particular slice, meaning your equity is only worth something if the company ends up being successful. This is worth repeating. The size of the pie matters way more than your piece of the pie. Not all companies have the same potential upside, so you want to focus on the long-term growth rate because the ultimate value of a company is typically most influenced by this. And growth is influenced by market size. So it's important that your company addresses a large enough potential market that it won't then place a limit on growth. The key word here is potential. That's because companies that attempt to take market share from other companies in a mature market seldom grow as quickly as companies that exploit a new market. So you may want to consider targeting companies that are going after a new market and not one that has plenty of competitors. So another factor to take note of here is that the company valuation is likely to change after each round of funding. It's worth asking your company what they think their valuation could be in 4 years. So why 4 years? This is the length of your typical vesting schedule, meaning at the end of those 4 years, you'll have vested all of your original equity and therefore can take ownership of those shares. We'll link more resources on vesting for you below. So, when you get an answer to this question, keep in mind they won't actually know what the projected value will be. Instead, focus on their logic and evaluate that instead of focusing on the actual number. In other words, ask them why they believe in the potential valuation and how they got to that number. Okay. So now that we have more information on the two inputs that determine the value of your equity, percentage of the company I own, and company valuation, let's go through some examples using some simple numbers. Here's what we'll assume. Your company has 100 million shares outstanding, Your exercise price is $1, and the company is valued at $1 billion. So to illustrate the point that the size of the pie matters more than your actual slice, let's say you own 20,000 shares in this scenario. And again, your company is valued at $1 billion. Using our equation, this would mean that your equity is worth $180,000. But if you own 40,000 shares and your company is worth $500 million, your equity would actually be worth less, at about 160,000 shares. So as you can see, the size of the overall pie can be way more important than the actual individual slice that you get. If you want to dig into the math behind this, it really just comes down to the price to actually purchase your incentive stock options. And in this case, in the first example, it only costs $20,000 to exercise, whereas in the second example, it costs $40,000. Getting more equity in certain cases isn't always a net benefit to you. You want to look at your size of the pie and then the cost to actually own that equity. All right, thanks again for joining. This is Tony from Wealthfront. We'll see you next time.